Hello, my name is John McCulloch, and I will be talking about the effects of combining soil-applied insecticide and Bt corn for integrated pest management and resistance management of western corn rootworm. I am currently at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. However, this work was done as part of my PhD dissertation at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, under Dr. Aaron Gaspin, and the main focus of my dissertation was resistance management and integrated pest management of western corn rootworm in Bt corn, or Bt maize. Western corn rootworm, Diabrotica virgifera, is a main pest of maize in the Midwest United States, an area known as the Corn Belt. Estimated economic losses from this pest exceed $2 billion annually, and that's a combination of yield loss and management costs. Since 2003, transgenic maize has been used to manage corn rootworm. There are currently 4 Bt traits commercially available for corn rootworm management, at least in the United States. However, resistance to all 4 traits has been detected in field populations of western corn rootworm. The top left image here is a rootstock that's been dug out of the ground and cleaned of the soil, and it's been held up to the sky so you can see the contrast. And that particular rootstock is a healthy rootstock that has sustained little to no feeding injury by larval corn rootworm. In contrast, the image in the corner on the bottom right is a rootstock that has sustained heavy feeding injury by larval corn rootworm. This insect has 1 generation per year. The females lay eggs in the soil in a cornfield, and the eggs overwinter in the soil. In the spring, the eggs hatch, and if the field is planted to maize again, the larvae develop through 3 instars feeding on the growing roots of the maize. Larvae pupate in the soil and emerge in the summer, and the adults feed and mate and continue the cycle. Bt crops have been used since 1996 for management of insect pests, and a Bt crop is a crop that has been genetically engineered to produce insecticidal toxins from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis. There are several benefits to Bt crops, including the reduced use of pesticides, reduced pesticide exposure risk to agricultural workers and to the environment, and also increased profits for farmers. There have been a variety of outcomes across the globe when using Bt crops for pest management, from the continued successful suppression of pest populations all the way to practical resistance, where those Bt crops no longer suppress pest populations. And since 1996, the global area planted to Bt crops has only increased. In the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, mandates a resistance management strategy for any Bt crops grown in the U.S. One of those strategies is the refuge strategy. Refuge is simply a host plant that does not produce the Bt toxin. And refuge provides for the survival of susceptible individuals that can mate with resistant individuals surviving in the Bt portion of the field. And this dilutes the resistant alleles into the heterozygous state in the next generation, and those are hopefully killed when they feed on the Bt crop. This image shows an integrated refuge where the refuge plants are interspersed within the Bt field. The tan dots are Bt plants, and the blue dots are non-Bt plants, or the refuge plants. Another strategy is the pyramid strategy, or the pyramid refuge strategy. The pyramid is simply a crop that has been engineered to produce 2 or more toxins that target the same pest, or, as I'll discuss later in this talk, pairing Bt crop with a soil-applied insecticide. And a pyramid provides what's called redundant killing, where an individual that is resistant to one of the toxins in the pyramid is still likely susceptible and will be killed by the second toxin in the pyramid. And pyramids are used with refuges similar to the refuge strategy, and the refuge provides for the survival of susceptible individuals. The U.S. mandates a certain proportion of refuge, and for the Midwest, the Corn Belt in the United States, the EPA mandates a 5% refuge for maize pyramided with Bt toxins targeting western corn rootworm. There are several advantages to pyramids over single toxin cultivars. This figure shows percentage refuge on the x-axis and generations until resistance on the y-axis. The upper left lines are pyramided varieties in different situations, and the lines on the lower right are individual toxin cultivars that have been deployed sequentially. And this figure shows that we can expect longer delays in the resistance for pyramided varieties compared to single toxin varieties deployed sequentially at the same proportion of refuge. Another benefit of pyramids is that when the percent mortality provided by each of the toxins in the pyramid individually reaches or exceeds about 80 to 85%, we can start to expect longer delays in resistance when those toxins are pyramided compared to deployed as single toxin cultivars sequentially. Moving on to the details of the study, where we evaluated the use of a soil-applied insecticide as a pyramid with Bt maize. And this image just gives you an idea of what the study area looked like. There have been several studies in the past that evaluate combining soil-applied insecticide and Bt maize. In this particular study, I want to draw your attention to the non-Bt maize with the soil-applied insecticide, which is Aztec, and that's the red arrow pointing to the C. And I also want to draw your attention to the Bt maize without soil-applied insecticide, and that's the red arrow pointing to the CD. Root injury is on the y-axis, and this figure shows that the non-Bt maize with soil-applied insecticide provides equal amount of protection to the root zone of the maize as the Bt maize without soil applied insecticide. Additionally, the addition of soil applied insecticide to the Bt maize, which is the red arrow pointing to the D, does not provide any additional protection to the roots when compared to the Bt maize alone. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the comparison of the control, which is the non-Bt maize without insecticide. That's the blue arrow pointing to the A, comparing that to the Bt maize alone without a soil applied insecticide, which is the blue arrow pointing to the CD. And this figure shows that Bt maize by itself does a very good job of protecting the roots of the maize plants, indicating that the population in this study is still susceptible to the Bt toxins. In a different study, non-Bt maize with soil applied insecticide, which is the red arrow on the left, provided the same amount of protection to the roots as Bt maize with soil applied insecticide, which is the red arrow on the right. Next, comparing Bt maize by itself, which is the blue arrow on the right, comparing that to the control, which is non-Bt maize without soil applied insecticide, the blue arrow on the left, both of those treatments have equal root injury, and that indicates that the population in this particular study was completely resistant to the Bt toxins. So when you had Bt maize with soil applied insecticide, the Bt maize had no effect, and all of the effect of reducing root injury was due to the soil applied insecticide. And that brings us to our question: is pyramiding insecticide with Bt a useful resistant management strategy? Bt maize and insecticide are tools that are both available to farmers, and they are often paired together by farmers. Some farmers use insecticide as a cheap insurance method against resistance to Bt traits in maize. So the benefits of soil applied insecticide with Bt maize remain uncertain. We wanted to quantify larval feeding injury on the roots and also quantify larval mortality to address the question, can a soil applied insecticide be used in a pyramid with Bt maize to delay resistance to that Bt maize? We had two factors, maize type and soil applied insecticide. Our two different maize types were a pyramid of M-cry3A and E-cry3.1AB, and it's non-Bt near isoline. And for the soil applied insecticide, we used Force 3G, which is tefluthrin. It's a pyrethroid, and it's applied at planting in furrow at a rate of 5 ounces per 1,000 feet of row. So that gave us 4 different treatments, and we used a randomized complete block design with 6 replicates at 2 different locations. We conducted this experiment in 3 different years at 2 Iowa State University research and demonstration farms just outside of Ames, Iowa. The farms were about 5 miles apart and were planted to a rootworm trap crop the previous season. And what that is, that means that in the previous season those fields were planted to maize that had a mixture of different maturities, and that drew in rootworm from the surrounding area that would lay their eggs in that maize field, and then the next season we would plant our study into that. So the important part of that is these populations in the study were natural or wild populations and came from the surrounding landscape. Plots were planted in late April through mid-May, and we erected or installed large emergence tents or emergence cages to contain any emerging adults. Those were installed in mid to late June. Adults were collected from those cages from 3 times per week from late June to October, and additionally corn plants were dug up and the roots were washed of soil and rated in late July to early August using the 0 to 3 node injury rating scale. Survivorship data was standardized to adults per plant in each plot. The adult data was log 10 transformed, and the root injury data was square root transformed in the analysis. We used a proc mix procedure in SAST, and the fixed effects were maize, insecticide, and their interaction, and we also had included the random effects of block by maize, block by insecticide, and block by maize by insecticide. This table shows the results of the analysis of both the fixed and random effects. Maize and insecticide and the interaction of those two were all significant for root injury and survival to adulthood. To understand those interactions, we're going to look at the values of root injury and adults per plant for those different treatments. Let's start with root injury on the left. We found the greatest amount of root injury in non-BT maize without insecticide and the lowest amount of root injury in BT maize with insecticide. Non-BT maize with insecticide and BT maize without insecticide provided intermediate levels of protection to the roots. I want to draw your attention to the BT maize without insecticide. The amount of root injury in that treatment was about 0.5, which is the threshold for unexpected root injury. And that indicates that the populations in this study were somewhat resistant to the BT traits. However, adding insecticide to the BT maize further reduced root injury and provided an additional protection of about 1/3 of a node of injury in root protection. And we found similar results in adults per plant as we did with root injury. Looking at an economic analysis, adding soil-applied insecticide to BT maize reduced injury by approximately 1/3 of a node. And given that one node of injury reduces yield from 15 to 17%, the protection of that third node of injury resulted in a 4.8% yield increase when adding insecticide to BT maize. With the average yield for maize in Iowa in 2023 equal to 201 bushels per acre, that means adding insecticide onto BT maize rescued approximately 9.6 bushels per acre. At an average price in 2023 of just over $6 per bushel, that difference of 0.3 nodes of injury results in an additional $58 per acre in revenue. With the cost of insecticide ranging between $16 to $24 an acre, the amount of yield protected by that insecticide is greater than the cost of the insecticide and results in an economic benefit. However, it's very important to remember that this is a very special situation where the population of western corn rootworm is only partially resistant to the Bt traits in the maize. And also, I want to stress that this is not a long-term economic strategy. It's a short-term economic benefit. The data and the literature are very clear that continuous planting of Bt maize results in rapid resistance evolution to Bt maize. So this is a short-term economic benefit in a very particular, very narrow range of conditions. Next, we wanted to determine the dose or the percent mortality provided by each insecticidal treatment. And dose was calculated as 100% times 1 minus the survival in the treatment divided by the survival in the control. And we used a one-way ANOVA to test for differences in dose or percent mortality amongst the insecticidal treatments. This figure shows percent mortality on the y-axis for the insecticidal treatments on the x-axis. We found that Bt maize with insecticide provided the highest amount of mortality, and that Bt maize without insecticide and non-Bt maize with insecticide provided equal and lower amounts of mortality. Additionally, we found that the insecticide did not provide sufficient mortality to be used with Bt maize to delay resistance evolution to Bt maize. It provided significantly less mortality than 85%. In conclusion, we found that Bt maize and a soil-applied insecticide both reduce root injury and adult emergence. We found that Bt maize with soil-applied insecticide produced the greatest reduction in root injury and adult emergence. We found that using a soil-applied insecticide can produce a short-term economic benefit if the western corn rootworm population is partially resistant to Bt traits. I want to emphasize again that this is a short-term solution and should not be viewed as a long-term solution because the data clearly indicate that continuous planting of Bt maize results in rapid resistance evolution. So again, this is a short-term economic benefit under a very narrow range of conditions. And finally, the soil-applied insecticide used in this particular study, which was tefluthirin, did not impose sufficient mortality to delay resistance to Bt maize when used as a pyramid with Bt maize. I'd like to thank Syngenta for providing seed and funding for this study, and also my fellow lab members for providing invaluable support and help with this experiment. These are several references I used in preparation for this presentation, and a few more references. And I'd like to thank you for your attention today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is john.mcculloch john.mcculloch@uga.edu. Again, that's john.mcculloch@uga.edu. Thank you again for your time and attention.